Welcome back to Screen Reel. This is episode 2. Guys, I gotta be honest, I get very excited when I make these. These are actually really fun to make. And I know it's just me, it's just one person here, but I hope that hopefully down the line I will be able to get a co-host because these conversations are always better when there are multiple people participating. So yeah, anyways, let's get to it. Look, I didn't watch any movies this weekend. I know Plane came out with Gerard Butler and Mike Coulter. I'm gonna be honest, I wasn't really interested in it, so that's why I just skipped out on it. Before I get into the two main things that I want to talk about in this episode, I want to hop over to Box Office Mojo and look at the domestic weekend. So the top 4, if I'm not mistaken, are in the same order that they were last week. Avatar came out at number 1 with 31.1 million. Megan came out at number 2 with 17.9 million. Puss in Boots came out at number 3 with 13.4 million. A Man Called Otto with 12.6 million in number 4. And then in number 5 is Plane with 10 million. Now, this is Plane's opening weekend. It did manage to get into the top 5, but $10 million, I don't think that bodes well for the movie. You know, A Man Called Otto made more money than Plane. Plane is an action movie, so there should be more of a general appeal. But I'll be honest, I don't know what the marketing budget for the movie was. I didn't even know the movie came out until like maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. So they didn't really market the movie well. They didn't put it on a lot of people's radar. So that's probably why it came in so low at 10 million. Because, yeah, that is not good. But anyways, I kind of just want to go from the top to the bottom. So at number 1, we got Avatar: The Way of Water. It is the biggest movie out there right now, so that's not much of a surprise. It only had a 32% drop, and it's currently in its 5th weekend. So it's been out for about a month, and it's still making a lot of money. 31 million compared to 45 million last week. So the drop wasn't drastic. And then speaking of non-drastic drops, Megan in its 2nd weekend made $17.9 million. That's only a 41% drop from the first week to the 2nd week. Now, generally, what movie studios want to see is a drop between 50 to 60%. That's a healthy drop. Anything over 60% isn't all that good unless the movie opened up huge. Like Avengers Endgame had a drop that was over 60%, but it literally has the number 1 domestic opening weekend of all time at 350 million. So, you know, when you take into account that everybody wants to go watch it the first weekend, then it's going to have a much bigger drop. But for a movie like Megan, it made 30 million last weekend, and it only dropped 41% to 17.9 million, basically 18 million for the 2nd weekend. That is really, really good, and that's very, very impressive. Now, these numbers are only for the regular weekend. We are in the Martin Luther King weekend, so there is going to be that long weekend, but I am recording this, obviously, in advance, so I don't have the numbers for the long weekend. Then we got Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. I don't really care about Puss in Boots, but it didn't have much of a drop. It only had like a 1% drop from last week, which is crazy. Last week it was at 13.5 million. This week we got it at 13.4. So that's also very impressive. I mean, it's currently in its 4th weekend, so it's been out for just under a month. And look, I heard the movie was good. And now A Man Called Otto, in its first wide release weekend, made $12.5 million. Now, we can't compare that to the previous weekend because it was only released in a limited amount of theaters. It was only released in about 600 theaters. This weekend, it was released in almost 4,000. So it went up by 198%. But, you know, the circumstances of that are unique. So yeah, it went up from 4 million to 12.5 million, but this is its first actual wide release opening weekend. And then Plane came out at number 5 at 10 million, which is not good. It came out in 3,000 theaters. There's not much to say about that. But like I said, most likely it had to do with the lack of marketing. I heard the movie is pretty good. I may go watch it tomorrow on Martin Luther King Day. But yeah, it's not that impressive of an opening weekend for it. But overall, we pretty much have the same order that we did last week. And the movies are going pretty strong. January is usually a dead month, a dumping ground for movie studios, but things have been changing the past couple of years. You know, you can release like a Deadpool in 2016 came out in February. Superhero movies are generally like summer blockbusters, but Deadpool coming out in February was kind of the beginning of, like, we kind of saw the beginning of things changing in terms of like movie studios dropping certain movies in certain months. Anyways, without further ado, I do want to get into the main things that I want to talk about. The first one is Velma, the new TV series, dropped this past week. And I saw the first episode. I know 2 episodes dropped. I only saw the first one. So I want to talk about that first. There has been this hate for this show before it's even come out. It's normal to watch a trailer for an upcoming thing, whether it's a show or a movie, and then say that it's just not for you, that it doesn't look like something that you'd be interested in, and that's fine. But a lot of what I've been hearing about this, and this has been for like the past couple of months since we've known the show's going to come out, there are a lot of people complaining that the characters in the show are a different race than what the characters are in previous installments. And, you know, for example, like Velma in this show, I think she's supposed to be Indian. Shaggy is black. Daphne is Asian. And then Fred is still white. I never had a problem with that leading up to this show coming out. And honestly, look, I wasn't even looking forward to the show. I didn't even know when the show came out. I saw that it was out. I think it came out like at the time of this recording. The Velma series came out like 2 days ago. So I didn't even know that it dropped. This is very obvious. Look, these are fictional characters, right? It doesn't matter if when the characters were created, they were all white. Media is a product of their time. So, like, a movie that was made, for example, in the 1940s probably wouldn't be made today. So when these characters were created back in 1969, it was a different time back then. A lot of media, not just TV shows, but a lot of media did have predominantly white leads. And now that, you know, we're sort of changing that, we are screaming that it's woke, that there's an agenda of inclusivity, and to me it seems like it's actually the other way around. I feel like back then there was an agenda to make everything white, because if you look back at a lot of the main stars of the bigger films, most of them were white, and that is a fact. And then it's very interesting now that we're sort of letting other people from different races take over some of these roles that now we're whining and complaining about it. Look, I grew up watching Scooby-Doo, and Scooby-Doo isn't actually in this show. The show is about Velma. I saw a lot of complaints about that too, about why isn't Scooby-Doo in the show? This is his show. The show is literally called Velma. Velma is the main character. But look, Shaggy's race, for example, Shaggy being white has nothing to do with the character of Shaggy. Velma, her being white has nothing to do with her character. The same thing with Fred, the same thing with Daphne. So the race of these characters, if you change that, it doesn't change who the character is. There are a couple of fictional characters that does matter, like T'Challa, right? Black Panther. He has to be black because that's the character is from Africa. He's the king of an African country, so he has to be black. You can't change his race. The same thing with like Shang-Chi, right? But the characters in the Scooby-Doo world, their race has nothing to do with who the characters are. So I just never understood that argument. And then the other thing that I kept seeing was that the show seems woke or something. And look, what does woke even mean? Because that word gets thrown around so much, but it just feels like everybody that uses it has a different definition for it. It's like anytime, you know, you introduce a person of color into something, it's automatically woke. When I hear somebody use the word woke, I automatically tune them out because it's such a cringy word. Like, you don't know, like, people throw that word around when they don't like something. But anyways, enough about that. Let me get into the episode. Look, right off the bat, literally the first line is straight up, this is a female origin story. I know, you're not used to it. Usually origin stories have to do with males and how strong they are, and usually when females get origin stories, it's just about how miserable they are. And that made me roll my eyes. That was literally the first line. That made me roll my eyes. But I just kept watching, and I believe that is the only line in the entire show, in the entire first episode, that made me cringe. That's the only line that, did have that sort of forced message into it, that feminist message. The way it was used here, I didn't really like it. It wasn't for me. But the main basis of the story of this first episode is, we have Velma, and she feels guilty because her mother left, and her mother actually disappeared, but her father keeps telling her that no, her mom left them, she didn't love them, she just left. But Velma believes that her mother was kidnapped, and that's the main driving force of her character throughout the entire first episode, and probably for the entire first season of this show. And then we also get introduced to the other three main characters: Fred, Daphne, and Shaggy. Now, they're all not because this is a more adult show than what we're used to, so they're not exactly the characters. They're more exaggerated versions of the characters that we grew up with, which is fine because this is supposed to be a more mature show. The same way Harley Quinn is a more mature show. I do think it works better with Harley Quinn, but I'm going to be honest, I liked this first episode. I was very invested in the story, and the tone of the show does feel like a Scooby-Doo Mystery Inc. show. Now, obviously, Scooby-Doo wasn't in the first episode. Now, I don't know if maybe he'll show up in the later episodes, maybe in the last episode of season 1, but I don't know. I have to think that they will eventually introduce Scooby into the fold. The show is about Velma. It's not called Scooby-Doo, but Scooby-Doo is a core member, and based on the world that they built in this and that they introduced in this first episode, I do see a talking dog existing and living in this world. So yeah, those are my thoughts on it. I might continue watching it. I didn't not like it. I thought it was a very solid episode, but maybe I'm in the minority. Look, it doesn't take a lot to please me when it comes to media and shows and movies, so I could be in the minority on this. But yeah, those are just my 2 cents. Now let me just move on to this Snyderverse Netflix movement that we have been seeing and hearing online. Now, let me just give a brief history on this and just my point of view from the inception of this whole thing. So, as we know, Zack Snyder directed Man of Steel back in 2013. And I think that is probably top 5 superhero movies of all time. I love that movie, and I think Henry Cavill was great in that role. I'm saddened that he's not going to be Superman anymore, but more on that later. So anyway, Zack Snyder directed Man of Steel, then he moved on, and then he made Batman vs. Superman in 2016. And when Man of Steel first came out, it wasn't received all that well by the critics. It wasn't received terribly, but I think it has a 56% on Rotten Tomatoes. And then Batman vs. Superman came out 3 years later, and it got the critics tore that thing up. The critics tore that thing up. It has a 27% on Rotten Tomatoes. I personally don't like Batman vs. Superman. I was very disappointed by it. But then Zack Snyder was gonna direct Justice League, which was a direct sequel to Batman vs Superman. And there was a lot of drama behind the scenes, because when Batman vs Superman came out, Warner Brothers was not happy with the results. Because look, a movie with Batman and Superman and Wonder Woman in it easily should have crossed that $1 billion mark. The conversation should have been, will it hit 2 billion? How close to 2 billion will this get? But it didn't even hit 1 billion. It only made like $856 million. Obviously, I'm saying that relative to the budgets and the movie industry, like the industry as a whole, because $856 million is a lot of money. But when you're like talking about a multi-million dollar, a hundreds and hundreds of $million movie, obviously there's a problem there if it only made 856 million. But Warner Brothers were not happy with the results of Batman vs Superman. So halfway through the production of Justice League, they basically fired Zack Snyder, and then they spun the whole thing. They had a whole PR spin saying Zack Snyder stepped down on his own because of personal reasons, and he specifically chose Joss Whedon to continue his work. And that was the story that was out there from the moment he was fired to the moment the movie came out. And then when the movie came out, fans realized, yeah, this doesn't feel like a Zack Snyder movie, because it wasn't. It was this weird Frankenstein's monster of the stuff that Zack Snyder shot, the stuff that Joss Whedon shot, and the tones between them made no sense. And then there was this whole mandate about how the movie has to be under 2 hours because you can show more screenings in theaters, and then blah 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 blah. It was this whole corporate thing about how they would get more bonuses, so they thought that if they shortened the movie, they could show more screenings, and then it would make more money, and then they would get a bigger bonus. I'm not even kidding. That's exactly what happened. So anyways, when the die-hard Zack Snyder fans saw the movie, and they right off the bat knew, yeah, this is not Zack Snyder's vision. So from 2017, when Justice League first came out theatrically, up until May of 2020, when it was announced that they would finish Zack Snyder's Justice League and throw it on HBO Max, there was this whole hashtag trend about release the Snyder Cut, and they would spam this hashtag over and over and over again. And look, they got what they wanted. In May of 2020, Warner Brothers agreed to give Zack Snyder north of $70 million to finish Justice League. Now, mind you, the budget so far on this movie was close to $300 million when it first came out. And now they were giving an additional $70 million so that Zack Snyder could finish it, because there was a lot of scenes that he had to still get special effects on. I think Zack Snyder shot a couple things too. But anyways, that movie came out, it dropped. I thought it was a solid movie. It is 1 to 1.5 hours too long. There was so much that he could have cut out. But the movie came out in March of 2021. But that wasn't enough for the fans. No. Now they wanted to restore the Snyderverse, because the original plan for Zack Snyder was he was going to put out Man of Steel, then Batman vs Superman, then Justice League 1, Justice League 2, and Justice League 3. So now they got Justice League, they got the Snyder Cut, the Zack Snyder version of Justice League, his finished, complete vision, but now they wanted more. So now they started spamming hashtagging ever since March of 2021 up until now. Restore the Snyderverse. Hashtag restore the Snyderverse. And they've been spamming on that. I remember back in 2021 when Kong vs. Godzilla was coming out, they were spamming that hashtag on literally everything. I remember James Gunn's The Suicide Squad trailer dropped, and they spammed Restore the Snyderverse under everything. They spammed it under James Gunn's posts. They spammed it under every Warner Brothers trailer that dropped, the Kong vs. Godzilla trailer. And they review bombed Kong vs. Godzilla on IMDb. They were giving it like 1 star, and they were just spamming that. When the movie came out, they kept on hashtagging that on every post that Warner Brothers put out, and they gave 1 star. I don't know how they did it. They maybe created bots, they made multiple accounts, and they put 1 star reviews on the Kong vs. Godzilla movie on IMDb. And the director of Kong vs. Godzilla was like, guys, I have nothing to do with this. You don't have to take it out on me. So, look, these Zack Snyder fans, they're very diehard fans, and they're very devoted. I'll give it to them. They're very devoted to their cause, but the way they choose to express this is it's just wrong. It's just wrong. So fast forward to today. So during this entire time, they've just been spamming Restore the Snyderverse, Restore the Snyderverse. And then back in October, Henry Cavill came back as Superman in the post-credit scene of Black Adam. And then I actually saw Henry Cavill in person at 92NY in the live Josh Horowitz podcast. I saw him in person, and Henry Cavill, he was like excited to be back. But you could tell that he didn't want to come back for the Snyderverse stuff, because from what we know about Zack Snyder's Justice League 2 and 3, he was going to make Superman a bad guy. He was going to make Superman like succumb to Darkseid's influence, and Superman was going to be a bad guy. And in every interview that Henry Cavill had when he was back, he kept talking about how excited he was about, finally, bringing to the big screen a hopeful, joyful, brighter Superman, a more optimistic version of the character. That's obviously not what Zack Snyder was going to do in his Justice League 2 and 3. So people were excited to see Henry Cavill back, especially these Zack Snyder fans, but he was not intending to come back for anything Snyderverse. And then, as we know, James Gunn took over, and he has his own vision for what the DCU is supposed to be, so Henry Cavill is not part of those plans. And then ever since James Gunn took over, these same Zack Snyder diehard fans kept spamming hashtag fire James Gunn, hashtag bring back Henry Cavill, hashtag make the Ben Affleck Batman movie, hashtag restore the Snyderverse. And now, this started maybe like 2 or 3 weeks ago. I don't know how they come up with this stuff, but now they're campaigning for Warner Brothers to sell the Snyderverse to Netflix. Now, you might be thinking, like, I can see where the dots are connecting, because right now Zack Snyder is making a movie for Netflix called Rebel Moon. So Zack Snyder's already working at Netflix, so I guess it would make sense, hey, why not just sell it to Netflix? He's already there, he'll just do it there. But they're aggressively spamming this, like hashtag sell Snyderverse to Netflix, hashtag fire James Gunn, hashtag Henry Cavill Superman, hashtag Ben Affleck Batman, blah 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 blah. It's always the same hashtags, and it's always the same people. Just they keep spamming it over and over and over again. But look, I mean, the devotion, it's incredible. Because I've been saying, look, I was a huge, like I said, I loved Man of Steel. I was very much excited for Batman vs. Superman. But look, man, I was saying since back in 2017, the DCEU needs a reboot, and I'm glad that they're finally doing it. I'm excited to see the future, even if that means we don't see Henry Cavill again as Superman. I'm excited to just finally get good DC movies. So this reboot that James Gunn is currently working on is something that should have happened a long time ago. But these Zack Snyder fans, they just can't let go. They can't accept the Zack Snyder movies weren't popular among the general audience. And we can tell because these movies didn't make a lot of money relative to what they were supposed to make. Because the argument that they have is like, look, when Iron Man first came out, Incredible Hulk, Iron Man 2, Captain America, Thor, those movies made like $200-400 million. But that was back before superhero movies were incredibly popular. The MCU made superhero movies popular. And then it all culminated in the Avengers, which was a $1 billion movie. And then the following movie after that, Iron Man 3, that was another $1 billion movie. Thor 2 made like $600 something million. Captain America, The Winter Soldier made like $700 million. So at that point in time, when Man of Steel came out, these movies were like, they were churning out money. They were making a lot of money. So when you put out a movie about Superman, it should have made more money. Like, Superman only made like $650 million. Batman vs. Superman, I stated before, made like $856 million. And then Justice League only made like $670 million. Justice League, which is like a direct competitor to the Avengers. The first Avengers made like 1.5 billion, like 1.2 to 1.5 billion. I can't remember the exact number off the top of my head. Justice League made like less than half of that. So obviously these movies weren't popular with the general audience. So what is the point of continuing this story, this failed universe? I personally don't understand it. And this whole notion of selling the rights to Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman and Green Lantern to Netflix, there is no way that Warner Brothers would ever do that, because it makes no financial sense. And if they were up for sale, if Warner Brothers was giving up DC for sale, the price tag on that would be probably in the tens of billions of dollars, right? And there's no way Netflix could afford that. And that's just to buy the rights. Then they would have to cough up another couple of millions of dollars just to make the movie. Or the movies, because they're asking for Justice League 2, Justice League 3, Man of Steel 2, the Ben Affleck Batman movie. So it makes no financial sense. Unfortunately, what they're asking for is a pipe dream, in my opinion. And look, I am also no expert on this stuff, but look, even me, someone who's not an expert, can point out the ridiculousness of selling these DC characters to Netflix just so that they can finish a universe that wasn't making money in the first place. When streaming services make movies and they drop them directly onto their streaming service, they literally don't make any money. There's no box office. And look, those are basically my thoughts on this whole sell Snyderverse to Netflix thing. I don't think it's ever going to happen. Now, I did say the Snyder Cut was never going to happen either, but we saw how that turned out. But this is just ridiculous. But who knows? Look, all I can say is I'm excited to see James Gunn's vision. He already has that 8 to 10 year plan, and it should be getting revealed in the next couple of weeks. So anyways, guys, this was just my 2 cents on these 2 topics. I thought I would just talk about them. I wasn't even planning on watching Velma until, I saw it there. I saw like a little trailer of it, and then I saw the comments, and then I thought I just wanted to talk about it. And then the Netflix Snyderverse stuff, I thought was a little funny, but in a ridiculous kind of way. And so that's why I decided to talk about that. But that'll do it for this episode of Screen Reel. You can follow the podcast at Screen Reel Podcast on Instagram. I also put the video version of the podcast on my YouTube channel. It's just my first and last name, Ever Nolasco. And the podcast is also available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and Amazon Music. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys next week.